pointing to chance and pretty much chance alone when we're talking about like the independent example, right? If this path was so easy and you didn't need anybody or anything to propel yourself and you can be a chance, how come we keep pointing to chance and chance alone? If it was so easy, shouldn't there be 10 chances by now?
Peace, what's going down? It's the MEC Podcast. My name is DJ Payne One. I'm joined not only by Dame Ritter, but I also have a third. This is the second time ever that we've had a special guest. His name is Dan Runcie. We're going to get into that in a second, but this is the MEC Podcast, available on all of the finest podcasting platforms, including Stitcher, Spotify, so forth. But a special shout out to Audio MEC, who's a platform that we love and I use as an artist, not just a podcaster, and I believe Dame and his artists have used that over time as well. So it's not just something that we like because of the podcast. It's something I've been using for probably, I don't know how many years, since it started.
Before we jump into our topics today, let's talk a little bit about Trapital and maybe your background, because I've become a fan of the platform. I'm always trying to kind of raise the level of quality of conversations around the music industry. Your platform does that for sure. So let's talk about your background briefly and the Trapital platform.
Thanks, bro. Trapital is a media company that covers the business of hip hop. My goal with each article and each piece that I write, and with the podcast I recently launched, is to elevate the discussion on hip hop. It started from a place of passion, but it also started from a place of need too. I felt that there was a void in how hip hop was being discussed and how coverage about hip hop was so surface level. And when you think about it, there's so many business lessons that we can learn from the artists that are at the top of their game, but also the artists that are in the middle or the artists that are struggling. Like, it's no different than reading the Wall Street Journal and looking at companies that are succeeding and companies that are struggling too. And I wanted to bring that level of rigor to hip hop. It's something I had done in a number of industries earlier in my career. I started to do it myself as a freelance writer and decided to start my own publication to see where it goes.
Dope. Yeah, man. I think it's super important that young aspiring music entrepreneurs start to think smarter about, how they're pursuing the music industry. And I think a lot of what you cover allows for them to do that. I think it just kind of opens up their eyes to different ways of looking at things that are happening in the music industry. And hopefully that some of that can apply to their journey.
Definitely.
And I think something important to really start with is this whole Illuminati thing, because a week after we covered the Taylor Swift controversy, her house gets broken into. Bilderberg does not play. See, we just elevated the conversation beyond what's normal, man. Stay woke, people. But I know we have a hot topic. I know Dan said he was hot. He said his feet were covered in gasoline and he's just waiting to drop the match. And it's something that I know you, Dame, have a lot of passion about as well. Chance the Rapper's Breakfast Club interview.
Yeah, so for me specifically, the part where, and he's said this many times to aspiring artists, his advice to artists to never sign anything, right? Like, don't sign a management agreement, don't sign a publishing deal, don't sign a record deal. Basically, do everything yourself, like just hire the people that you need and progress that way. And that kind of gets me upset for a few different reasons, but I want to allow our guests, if that's the part that you want to weigh in on, I'm sure there's probably a couple of parts you want to weigh in on, but can you weigh in on that first before I go in? Because I feel pretty passionate about, not that he's giving wrong advice, it's just partial. It's just like, it's only a fraction. He only says a fraction of what I think the complete answer is. But Dan, if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, when I first saw it, he actually took a further step than Chance normally takes, because normally he's been about own your masters, own your publishing, and so forth. And it's like, okay, understandable. That has kind of become common language now. But when he said, don't sign a distribution deal, don't sign a management deal, that's the part that stuck out to me the most, because artists are able to own their assets and still do those types of deals. And depending on who you ask, Chance kind of did the same thing himself temporarily with that Apple Music deal. There's so much variety in what artists are now able to do to be able to get to that next level. And there's so much nuance with it. You could look outside of hip hop, look at the deal that Taylor Swift just re-upped with Republic Records. She now is able to own her assets, but it's an exclusive rights that she's giving to them because she wants the benefits of being able to get to that next level. So that's the thing that stuck out. There's so many varieties where you can maximize your independence and still do deals. But I think the part that frustrates me, and we were talking about this a little bit before we recorded with Russ too, these guys had great success, but it's not as easy for anyone to just go and pick up and do what they did. They had a number of factors working for them. And I think oftentimes the independent narrative can be, oh, I did it. It's just as easy as doing X, Y, and Z. Right. And that's not necessarily the case. Like they had a number of factors in their favor. And if another artist does that, it's almost harder than someone that gets signed to a label than expecting to become the next Rihanna. Right. It just doesn't work like that. There's more nuance, and it's almost a bit irresponsible because the "look at me, I did it, you can too" can easily get people's hopes up when there's a lot more that goes into it.
Right. That's like LeBron saying, "I did it, you can too," and he's sitting there at 6'8", 260, like, you know. So, but my thing is that in the music industry today, there are so many different paths to success, right? And your decisions that you make on your path are going to be dependent on a number of different variables, right? It can depend on your goals. Do you want to be a mega star, or do you want to just make a living off your music from the comfort of your home, or anything in between? So depending on your goals, you're going to make different decisions in terms of signing a deal or management or whatever. Maybe even depending on the type of music you make, right? I don't think an artist like Flo Rida would be successful the way we came up as an independent, because his music is for the clubs, and there's different ways to get your music in the clubs and on TVs and things like that. It's going to depend on the resources you have around you, right? Some people just happen to have the right people or smart people around them. So if you have the right people, then maybe you don't need to sign, you know, with this big manager or this big publishing, because you've already got things figured out. Even if we look at Chance's situation, the people around him, and I don't know his story to a T, like I don't know what role his father played in his success, but I know his father had ties to Obama, and I have to imagine that helped in some way, shape, or form, you know, at some point on along his career. He's had Pat the manager around him for quite some time. He's a very smart individual, and he's played a crucial role in his success. But the other person that was on very early that nobody ever talks about is Cara Lewis.
Yep.
And Cara Lewis is probably the most powerful booking agent on the planet, and you have that person attached to your career at a very early stage. She definitely moved mountains for him in the early, and that's not somebody that people are going to have access to. And I think her name's not said enough in his story, but I'm pretty sure that she's played a large role. So to have these resources and then to turn around and tell people like, hey, you don't need anybody, just do it yourself, that's tough for me to like be able to receive that advice and pass that on to other independent artists when his path has been very unique. It would be very difficult to duplicate his path, you know. And I don't want to take away from the quality of his music and his ability as an artist, because he's a dope artist, right? Like he's definitely put in his 10,000 hours plus. He makes quality music, got a quality brand. At the end of the day, that's what's most responsible for his success. But there's other factors involved that has created his path. It's a unique path that can't really be duplicated with ease, but he makes it sound like it can be.
Right. And that's the issue. And Cara Lewis as well is tied with Russ, who has also pushed the same narrative. So yeah. that's what's frustrating. Like the way that I've started to describe Chance is that he's someone that has, the small, manageable business model of like what he can do and achieve, but his expectations are through the roof, right? And it kind of goes back to what you were saying in the beginning. If you just want to be small, manageable, and have an operation, and that's your goal, yeah, you can be independent and be very successful doing that. But if you want to be a Drake or Rihanna, you want to be the biggest star in the world, even Chance himself, if we're just being honest, hasn't got to that level. He's huge, but his album didn't go number one. NF got the number one album that same week. And that was actually one of the things I talked about in the article. Chance had some weird promotional offers that were associated with this album. Let's say he had the backing of a Universal or someone like that. Could that have helped him get a stronger album? I think it's debatable. On one hand, people didn't actually think the album quality was the best, and that's always going to stunt your performance. But if you have the backing of a major, then yes, it's going to help you sell records. But if you're an artist that A, wants to sell records, and B, want to take as much of the pie yourself, then you're going to hit some roadblocks at some point. And I think it's inevitable that he himself hit those. And one of the things that stuck out to me with the interview as well, now I want to go so far to say he contradicted himself, but it's clear that he has his like feet in the ground with this, because I think it was Angela Yee was like, okay, you said that you had gotten an offer that was like through the roof, or there was some type of discussion with Sylvia Rowan, and he was like, yeah, there was some number, but even if there was some astronomical number out there, I'm a beacon of this movement. It would damage my brand if I didn't move through with that. And that's absolutely correct. But with that said, you're also acknowledging that, yes, I can't accept a sound deal that would make sense for me because I'm a beacon of this movement. Therefore, that qualifies your underlying point.
Right. My whole thing is, I mean, let's just think about it. Like, why do we keep pointing to Chance and pretty much Chance alone when we're talking about like the independent example, right? If this path was so easy and you didn't need anybody or anything to propel yourself and you can be a Chance, how come we keep pointing to Chance and Chance alone? Right. I know there's other successful independent artists, but he's become like the independent music media darling, and we keep pointing to him. If it was so easy, shouldn't there be 10 chances by now? Shouldn't there be 30 chances by now? Should there be 50 chances by now?
Well, right. There are a fair amount of. I was shocked that to learn that Taylor Swift's first, I think, 7 albums were released by technically an independent. So she's bigger than Chance, obviously. But in the hip hop world, so many of us consumers are artists. We're looking at Chance the Rapper as, he's the loud minority in terms of independent artists who have reached a level of success that's comparable to somebody with major label backing. He's almost indistinguishable from, hell, he's doing better than a lot of major label artists. Quite a few. And most. Sure. And so we're looking at what he did and the fact that he's constantly Taylor Swift wasn't talking about being independent. Chance the Rapper, that's his brand. That's one of the major foundational elements of his brand as a musician, to talk about his independence. Same way with there are a lot of artists like that, the entrepreneurship and so forth. But for Chance, it's specifically being independent. And so we as consumers who are by and large also creators, we're looking at it saying, okay, well, this has to be it. And I think that's what's harmful, because we look at what Chance is saying, and he's taking a hardline approach and saying, you don't need this and do this. And we're going to believe him because we see his level of success and say, okay, we got to follow his blueprint. His blueprint isn't going to work for all of us. It's just not. Nobody's blueprint is going to work for everybody. It's not one size fits all. And I think my fear with it is that we're not getting motivated by Chance in general because we don't know enough about the business to understand how he ascended to where he is, and we don't know enough about the business at large to kind of take stock of our own resources and our own goals and find a way to make that happen for us. Maybe not at the level of Chance. I mean, I see we have these conversations all the time, Dan. We have the artists who say, well, if there's no way I can be as big as Drake, so I'm not even going to try. Then there are the other people that say, well, as an independent, I should be able to be as big as Drake independently and own all my masters. And it's like, both sides are really getting it wrong. The more you learn, the more you find that there's a middle ground, and you can plan all day. I plan to be a multimillionaire by now. I'm not, but I'm doing better than most people in my position. And that's something that I should be proud of. A lot of artists don't anticipate there being this gradient. You know what I mean? There's a spectrum of success. On the one hand, you have the artist that's not doing a damn thing. On the other hand, you have Drake. In the middle, there's all the space in the world. Chance the Rapper might be closer to the Drake side of things. Tech Nine too. Me, I might be closer to the middle or a little below that. But there are tons of independent artists who are, making 6 figures a year, making 5 figures on the high end, eventually hitting the 7-figure mark. But they're making music for a living. Their fans love them. They're happy with their life. It's their job. It's amazing. And we have to understand the intricacies and nuances, as Dan said, of that world, of that spectrum. Otherwise, we're going to look at it ourselves as a failure if we don't reach Chance the Rapper's success. And we're not engaging with what he's saying at a higher level. We're taking it all at face value, which is the wrong way to take in any kind of information.
Yeah.
Right.
At the end of the day, man, I just want people to educate themselves, right? Because the more you learn, the better decisions you can make, right? And it's not about signing no deal or getting involved with nobody. It's about getting involved with the right people and about signing the right deals that are for you, that fit your goals, that are in line with what you want to do. Because I even get mad at like the masters conversation where people are like, never sign away your masters. And then they, obviously master slave, it has like a master slave connotation, and people just go extra with it. There's a dollar amount for everything, right? Like even Drake would sell his masters for $2 billion, right?
Wait,
like,
Drake owns his masters?
I mean, he probably doesn't. But what I'm saying is there's a dollar amount for pretty much everything, unless there's an emotional tie or unless it's tied to your brand or whatever. Like for most artists that we work with, if I went up to them and was like, hey, I'm gonna give you $100,000, make a 7-song EP, but you don't own nothing, most of them would be happy as shit to get $100,000. So it's not about never signing anything unless, again, it's just emotional and you just want ownership. But like there in the real world, like there's a dollar value attached to everything. And why do we always tell artists to look at their career like a business, right? Every other business, even United Masters, who's always preaching to artists and posting things on social media about keeping your masters, never signing your masters. Like the owners of United Masters gave up some of equity in their company for funding in their company. So why are we looking at it any differently than any other
Google
business?
funded them.
If Trapital got an infusion of however many dollars, you would have to give up a percentage of ownership in your company to receive that infusion of capital, right? And that capital hopefully helps add to the growth of your business. So it makes sense. So why would an artist look at their business any differently than any other business in any other industry? I just don't get where we're taking this conversation sometimes.
Right. And we can even extend it to the 360 conversation too, right? 360 deals are often criticized, and it's understandable why, but Jay-Z is technically in a 360 deal that he chose to re-up with Live Nation. Not everyone can get Jay-Z's numbers, but if you can get something that works in your favor, you have to consider it. He would have been a fool not to have taken that deal. I think it was back in 2008. There would have been no Rock Nation. There would have been no extra money to fund all the other startups and all the other investments that he's done. You have to look at everything on the basis and see like what actually works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah, let's have some smarter conversations, and let's stop closing the door on certain things when you should have a conversation. And I'm not saying, hey, give your masters up for a few boxes of cereal. I'm saying that you need to understand the value of what you have, because somebody may give you a deal with the proper value in exchange, or more so. You know, you just don't know, right? Because with masters, I always look at it like, you know, say Payne, like let's say you have a shovel, you don't really know how to use that shovel, and you can probably mine a few ounces of gold with that shovel. However, I'm saying I can take that shovel and start mining pounds of it, right? So why wouldn't you work with me, give me a percentage of ownership in your shovel, because I can take the shovel and start getting pounds as opposed to you getting out. That's the same thing that we're doing with your master, with a label, theoretically. Now, if a label is not doing shit for you, then that's a bad deal. That's a bad situation. But essentially, a label is supposed to be able to exploit your masters in a way that you can't do by yourself. So they're creating more value from your art than you can. And that's essentially why they want ownership or a percentage of ownership in what you're doing, because you're growing the pie. So I just get frustrated sometimes, especially when I follow United Masters posts really piss me off sometimes. Like, obviously they're just posting these so that you use their service. They're pushing their service, so they're pushing this narrative. And Steve Stout has probably signed hundreds of deals for artists that he has managed in the past, where they've signed away their masters. But now, since he owns this company where they're looking for independent artists to distribute their music, now he's all about master ownership. It's crazy to me, man. We definitely got to have these conversations.
Well, you know, people change. Let me try to be the fair, neutral one.
I mean, I'm not knocking him, but all I'm saying is, like, you know, everybody's promoting a service, everybody's promoting a platform. They're going to spin the narrative in a way that helps them in their service, right? But he wasn't saying this when he was representing Nas or whoever else he represented in the past. And that's why I think people just need to learn about the business. And, you know, we can't, actually, I do want to talk about Russ too, because Russ annoys me for a different reason. But since Dan brought him up, the thing about Russ, when he gives information, a lot of the information Russ gives is on point. And I've been following Russ for the longest because I actually tried to sign Russ. Russ was almost, I can't say, well, he turned it down, but we definitely flew him out a couple times when I was running Funk Volume, because I noticed like his talent super early. This was probably like 2013 or 14. And when Russ talks, he has great advice, but the one thing that he overlooks is just how talented he is. Like, Russ is super talented, and I think it's easy for a lot of people that get to a certain point to give advice and not acknowledge like the gift that they had, whether it was God-given or whether he put in his 10,000 hours plus. But Russ makes music, and if you don't like him, that's besides the point. You have to acknowledge the quality and the consistency in which that man can put out music. It's not normal. It's definitely not normal. The melodies, again, the quality, and that's something that's very hard to duplicate. I have not come across another artist that I was so confident about since Russ. That's how rare I think it is. And it's been probably 4 or 5 years now. But that's my only thing about Russ. I just wish that he would acknowledge, like, I mean, and don't get me wrong, he does acknowledge how good he is, but not when he's giving advice. You know, when he's talking his shit and he's, you know, talking about his brand and his, you know, he'll definitely acknowledge how good he is, but it's not when he's giving his advice. And I think that's, you know, that's the secret to his sauce. Like, he's dope. So that's my only thing with Russ when he starts talking.
Did you see his interview with Joe Budden a couple months ago?
Most of it. I saw most. The pull up. Yeah. I saw most of it.
Yeah, it was the same thing. Like, I guess he understands that he has some privileges, right? Like, he's white and he's gonna get played on pop radio and things like that. But I think similarly, he's just like, okay, I put out one song a week consistently for a week. Y'all should be able to do that too. And it's like, yeah, I guess to your point, that consistency means something, and it's something that a lot of people can't do. But still, there's no nuance. It just comes from this place of holier than thou. And I think in a lot of ways, it's also the delivery too, right? Like, because he's seen as a bit of like an outsider, and then when he condemns when he condemns rappers talking about like taking Xans or any of the drugs, I think he means well. I think it just comes off in a wrong way. So it's funny. I don't think I've ever seen people, even including myself, has such strong opinions, but the average person, at least the average person that is upset about Russ, probably couldn't name a single Russ song, which right. is very funny. But that's not, I mean, it's not necessarily a knock on him, because you can't sell out staples without having people know your music, but it just speaks to like how many different factions that there are, and how you could be that big, but your haters are a completely different group right. of people. And I think similarly to Chance, he kind of knows that, and it's kind of the shtick, and he's bought into that. But in many ways, yeah, that is kind of what the life of an independent artist is like. Even when you get to that level, you can be extremely successful, you can do your thing, but there's still going to be large pockets of people that don't know who you are, and honestly don't have to go out of their way to check out your music because it isn't distributed in the same way. Actually, Russ is a good, I mean, because obviously Russ signed a partnership deal, and you have on one hand Chance is saying don't sign a damn thing, and then Russ basically built up leverage to sign a partnership deal. So it's two very different pieces of advice, but we see that it's working for Russ because it's opened up the door for radio. It's opened up the door for global support. But for the type of music he makes, again, going back to my point in the beginning, like your decisions are going to be based on a number of factors, and it can be just the type of music that you make. Russ has a global appeal, like the music he makes, his look, his style, his feel, like it definitely has a global appeal. So I think a partnership with a major label makes a lot of sense for him. If he were to follow Chance's advice and not get involved with anybody, you know, I think he would still have a good amount of success, but he wouldn't be on the level of doing the stadium runs that he's doing now. Like Russ on the low is probably one of a handful of people that can fill stadiums. Agree.
Who is Chance the Rapper's distributor?
I don't know. I would imagine he just has direct. I mean, he's at a point now he could probably just have a direct conversation. But maybe just TuneCore or something like that. I don't know.
I mean, even if it's TuneCore, he's still entering some sort of agreement. It's not signing a formal exclusive distribution deal, but you're agreeing to terms of a distributor.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go that far to say that that's the same as like a dish, like working with us at Foundation even. You know, so I wouldn't go that far, but I'm sure he is at a point now where he can just like call Spotify and coordinate a release. I mean, he did it with Apple, so it's definitely an option. But again, man, I just want people to know that there's different ways to maneuver in this industry. We're talking about two very successful people that have taken two very different routes, and neither one of them is complaining. Right? So, and those are just two routes out of probably thousands at this point, you know. So it's just hard for me to hear some of their advice, whether they really believe it or whether they're just playing it up because that's what their brand is about. You know, we should be smarter at this point to know that there's different options and to make different decisions. Because, you know, a lot of artists that I work with are not knowledgeable and they're skeptical to a fault. So they're keeping everybody at bay, right? Like they're not working with a manager, they're not working with a label because they think everybody's out to get them. You know, and I'm sure when they hear Chance or some of these other artists talk, it doesn't help, right? It only builds that skepticism because it's like, oh yeah, I can do this by myself. and then I just watched the TLC movie, and then I just heard this horror story over here. So everybody's moving with their guard up, and it's actually working to their detriment because they're not, they just have their guard up instead of educating themselves, so they're not letting the right people in, and they're doing it themselves, and they're making very minimal progress.
All right, so Chance the Rapper is distributed by Ditto Music, and I believe Ditto Music is something that any musician can theoretically use. So yeah, it's like a TuneCore. I mean, look, they do have terms. You're entering into an agreement with them, no matter what. It's not formal. It's not exclusive. I mean, it is formal. It's actually very formal. Probably as you're, I think most people upload something to TuneCore or CD Baby or DistroKid, and they just completely skip over that long ass terms of service agreement. Because there's an end user agreement that comes with everything these days. And little do you know, you're entering into an agreement with that distributor simply by using their services. Granted, what's different between that and, say, a deal with a label is that there's no exclusivity. You can pull out at a certain point. It's not the easiest thing to do. You can't just click a button and say, I'm out. You have to go through a whole process and a waiting period. But nevertheless, these are the things. This is what we call nuance. It's not just the simplest thing in the world to convey to millions of independent or unsigned artists who want to be the next Chance the Rapper. You got to learn what all of this stuff means, and even if you're somebody who's doing it 100% yourself, and all you're doing is hiring companies like Ditto or TuneCore for individual services like distribution over here, or Song Trust over here for royalty collection on the composition end, or such and such a PR company, you still have to understand the landscape and the tiny details of what each service provides. And that's a lot to take on. That's not something that you can just watch a single Breakfast Club interview and know how to do. So I would love to see the conversation become a little more elevated and a little more detailed, because unfortunately someone's going to watch, I'm sure a lot of them, and I think that's what your issues with these kinds of conversations are. The average person watching them isn't going to know probably doesn't even know the difference between distribution and publishing. You know what I mean? So without that education, can it be harmful? Yeah, but without education, it's pretty much any piece of out of context information is going to harm the person consuming that information.
And that's the other piece too. I mean, there's so many different moving parts, to this business, that it's going to be very difficult to tackle it all by yourself. Like, none of this stuff is rocket science. You can easily figure this stuff out. Actually, join our live sessions. We talk about a lot of this stuff. But as you grow, you're gonna hopefully you get to a point where, like, it's just not manageable, right? To have your merch, to have your touring, to have your publishing, to be making your music, to be doing your videos. Like, all of this shit is not manageable at a certain point unless you want to cap your I wouldn't necessarily success, but unless you don't want to go past a certain point, right? So you're gonna need to let some people in at some point. I just hope that people are knowledgeable enough to know, or to have the right conversations and get involved with the right people, to be able to identify who can help you versus who's going to stunt your growth or hurt you. But anyway, man, Payne, did you have another topic that you wanted to talk about before we close this out?
It's a can of worms. We'll talk about it next time. But Dan, I want you to at least shout out your social media and how people can access the content of Trapital Media Group.
Oh, thank you. If you go to trapital.co, that's trapital.co, you can sign up for the newsletter. I write one article a week, and this week's article was actually on this topic, Chance, and what I think he gets wrong about ownership and independence in music. So check that out. And I also have additional content as well for paid subscribers. Those are up-to-date insights that I send each Monday and Friday on the most important hip-hop news happening. It's also a discussion forum as well for Trapital members, a number of music execs in there, tech leaders, people all across the intersections of both music, technology, and business. So check that out. It's been growing, and you can also find me on social if you go to Trapital on Instagram, Twitter, etc. And you can follow me personally at RunCDan on Twitter or on Instagram.
So, is there anything from the article that we left out in this conversation that we should have highlighted?
I think we got most of it. One of the things that I will say, I think that Chance has what I would consider like a smaller bootstrap strategy, and I compared it to a tech company. I compared it to MailChimp. They've definitely been a success story. I know a lot of content creators use them, and they're approaching $700 million this year, which is great. But they're not doing Uber numbers, or they're not doing, some of the other unicorn numbers in terms of revenue that they're getting. I think Chance is unique because, similar to like how we said LeBron, he's someone that has had the MailChimp strategy, if you will, and is gotten close to those Uber expectations, and is still trying to say like, hey, I did this, so can you. But it's like, no, for most people that pursue a MailChimp strategy, the outcome is going to be MailChimp success. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is very successful. Most companies can't do that, and it's going to be hard for people to even get there. But just understanding the expectations and what the strategy you push dictates, and how record labels themselves can be a bit more accommodating to that.
Oh, cool. Well, I look forward to reading the article. We'll definitely share it when it comes out. It's coming out this week, next week?
Yeah, it's I'm gonna send it out shortly after this. So just need a polished up. You think so? You'll get it.
Dope.
All right, once again, appreciate all of you for tuning in. Shout out to all the listeners on Audio Mac. Shout out to all the listeners on my YouTube channel. Shout out to all the listeners on Apple, on Spotify, on Stitcher. My name is DJ Payne 1. Thank you, Dan Runcie, for being a part of today's episode. This is episode 12. Shout out to Dame Ritter, who's not really a special guest. He's just always here. But we appreciate him. We do. And we appreciate that small, mysterious door behind him.
Appreciate you both. I'm glad you guys started this podcast. I know when Dame and I were talking, he's like, I don't know if we're going to do a podcast, but I'm glad.
Nah, Dame knew.